Christmas these days seems like we have so much. And back in my days growing up, we didn't get all that much. That was in the 30s and during the World War II days. And what we did get, we really enjoyed it and were thrilled to get it, and we enjoyed it. One of the Christmases I remember is this family that lived at the farm. They didn't work for us, they were on welfare. Dad gave them a house there to live in. Of course, he did a few minor chores for Daddy, helping with the cattle a little bit, maybe feeding some cattle. And that Christmas, there was at least 8 or 10 children in the family. And there was a huge tree, probably 8 feet tall. And I remember it was decorated. It was the prettiest Christmas tree I ever saw, I thought. And the circumstances made it more meaningful. And I don't remember about the gifts on it. I'm sure it wasn't too many gifts on it, but that Christmas tree was made, the decorations were made mostly from homemade, the little circles you made out of crepe paper or some kind of paper and things like that, and popcorn around it, and little leaves and just anything. It was beautiful, I thought. No lights on it.
Children came along. We had the Christmas at home at the Grandma's house, and she would always have a big meal on Christmas Day, that afternoon, and would have the turkey and cook the ham in the large stein, and we had just a real big meal then. But before we got to open any packages, she always had one of the grandchildren to read the Bible, and we would read the story of the Christ child. One of my most memorable Christmases as a child was when I was about 5 years old, and we had a big snow. It was a 19-inch snow that Christmas, and that was the year that I got a big doll and a doll bed and a dresser, doll dresser, and several little toys, and they were all made out of wood, and I still have every one of them.
When I lived on the farm when I was 8 years old, and what all we did and what all we raised, and that's what we had for Christmas. We raised our English walnuts, we raised popcorn, and we had hickory nuts and walnuts, and that's what we got out and picked up for Christmas. We popped popcorn and decorated our tree with that, and we made the little hoops, rings, and decorated our tree with that.
I'd like to tell you about Christmas in the little church where I grew up. I was in a very small church, a small community, and we had a little one-room church. And at Christmas time, we had a Christmas pageant. We put up a great big Christmas tree, probably the biggest tree I ever saw as a small child. And after that, Santa Claus would come and give us all gifts. The program was always on Christmas Eve. And we would have the children do the pageant. The adults would sing in a little choir. And I can remember that I went from the smallest angel all the way through to the Virgin Mary, and then I graduated into the choir. After the program was over, we would all go back to our pews, and in would come Santa Claus. I guess we must have drawn names because everybody got a gift off of the tree. And the church furnished everyone with a bag of fruit, nuts, candy, that sort of thing. And then we all went home, and that was our Christmas Eve. And I remember it with really fond memories.
One of our favorite family, I guess, traditions would be going to get the Christmas tree.
Well, that was started somewhere right in the early 70s, or I guess it was when I was at work, and one of the guys I worked with, James Spears, his father-in-law, Mr. Fred Perry, had a farm up here on Rock Bridge Road, or just off of it. And we'd cart all you little ones, your mother, and I, we'd put all of you in the station
wagon, old 69 Ford.
Yeah, 68. And we'd all head up to Mr. Perry's farm, possibly a week before Christmas. And we'd go out there and talk to him. He'd say, just go ahead and look. It's out there. Of course, he had several acres.
And we'd go out there and we'd pick the biggest tree we could find and go, that's the one we want. And,
Yeah, I cut down trees after a while. Now, the first few times, I believe I've got one shorter.
well, we were a lot younger
But you were
then.
younger. But as you got older, because this went on for 15 years, at least.
At least.
And I wound up starting at the ground level, cutting a tree. But as it went on, I wound up cutting one 3 or 4 times as high as a regular ground level tree, just to get the top out of one.
Yep. And then after you cut it down, then you pack it until
Yeah,
we got
along with you
older.
all, as you
We'd
all
hold
know.
the end of it
Yeah,
up
you
as you
know.
up now.
That used to tickle me, because you always just like stair steps anyhow. Starting with 4 girls and 1 little bitty boy, and him 4 years old maybe. And y'all would grab a hold of a little bitty limb.
And
try to
help
hold
you
the
carry
tree
the
up.
tree.
And then we'd get it down to Mr. Fred's and everything, and then poke it into the station wagon.
And it always hang
Now,
on
that
the
was a
back
devil.
window.
After you got the tree in there, all 7 of us had to fit back into that station wagon to come back on.
When we pushed the seats down, I know,
Oh,
and we would
the backward.
squeeze in back in there with the tree and sit
the
beside
backward
it.
gate, yeah.
And we sang Christmas carols
Oh,
going
yes.
home. And
That
then
was-
we'd stop at the little market and
Yeah,
get
at
something
Rock
to drink.
Ridge, stop there and get something to drink.
And there was another gentleman somewhere along the way that used to have the little donkey.
Oh, that was Mr. Womack, that's Joe Womack's father, Billy Womack, I believe it was.
And he'd have the
He'd have the donkeys out there in a, Christmas,
nativity scene.
Yeah,
And
nativity
it'd be a
scene.
little live donkey. And I can remember
that was real good, yeah. Those were the times.
For as long as I can remember, we always had a family tradition of going out and looking for a Christmas tree, and it had to be a cedar tree. And when I was really small, I can remember going up to people's houses and that were really poor, and we'd take a sack of oranges and we'd ask them if we could cut a Christmas tree off of their property. And so that was what we did every year. And when I was about in the 4th or 5th grade, my mother and the neighbor next door got the idea of having I believe it was a pine tree. And so we went and got it, and we put it up, we put all our ornaments on it, and it just looked so ugly to me. I went to bed and I was crying in my room, and Mother heard me crying, and she came in there and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, that tree just doesn't look like our Christmas tree, and I don't like it." And so the next morning when I got up, that tree was taken down, and we got a cedar tree and put up in its place. And that's one of the outstanding memories, was how my parents always tried to make Christmas a tradition and make it special.
One thing I remember about a Christmas in particular was the morning my mother called, about 5 o'clock or so in the morning, and said that my dad's mother had died that morning, on Christmas morning. And as sad as it was, I always thought of it as her last gift to us. Dying on Christmas Day, she gave us snow that Christmas Day, and she got all of my dad's brothers and sisters together for one last time, and it was really, really special. Although it was sad, she was in a much better place. And for me, Christmases are kind of divided into 2 types. The kind that I grew up with, the home with your mom and dad, safe, sound, and secure. In particular, I remembered one morning waking up and my doll that Santa had given me was chewed up by my brother's dog. So that was kind of sad. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I think I cried. And as a parent or an adult, I remember Jane and I's first Christmas together thinking, wow, I'm married, I have my own tree, my own ornaments. I thought this was really, really special. And then as my children came along, they were of course special, and I think back to all the Christmases when they were little, all together, before, like when Sam was like 18 months old or so, Brett was about 10, Alicia about 8. They were all mine, and I had them at home with me, and they didn't care to be anywhere else before cars and boys or girls, or time marched on, and those times were the best because they were my kids at my house. But now I'm looking for new memories.
Our first Christmas was together. We got married on the 15th, and the most enjoyable Christmas we ever had. And we had $10 between us. Well, let me correct that. Cora had $10. And we moved in a 3-room apartment. And Robbie was born in September of the following year, and then it made next year's Christmas much better. And there were 2 years after, there was additional greater Christmas 4 times. And it's been good, and God has been good to us. And I'm thankful.
Christmas, and we have devotional. We just have like church on Christmas Eve night. And all the gifts is hid, and bring them all out before midnight. So we have had several Christmases together, 44 to be exact. Will be the 15th of December this year. And I thank God for each one of them.
We'd like to tell you about our first Christmas together that occurred some 42 years or so ago. In the year of 1957, December, we were both in school. And I was in my 3rd year of school, and Claudia was working in downtown Winchester, Kentucky. And I was working part-time at the Kroger store and going to school. And we enjoyed our first Christmas living upstairs in the balcony of the gymnasium on the campus of Southeastern Christian College. And quite a lovely place to begin our 3 years of marriage. And that first Christmas, a rather unusual thing happened, and I'm going to let Claudia tell you about that.
As you said, I was working as a secretary in downtown Winchester. So one day on my lunch hour, I went shopping for a Christmas present. Knowing that he needed a coat or a short jacket, I went into one of the little small privately owned department stores and found just the right one. And then I had it put on layaway, and I felt so good about that because it was the first Christmas and I had already gotten started and done the first Christmas present. Then I'll let him tell you what happened.
Well, it just so happens that for some reason I went into the same store the same day, just shortly after she had been there. And as I was looking at the rack and the choices of coats and jackets, what did I see but the jacket she had chosen for me with my name on it. And of course I had to fake it on Christmas morning that I had no idea what was in that box. And it's sort of been a joke with us ever since that we almost always know what we give each other for Christmas. And so our first Christmas was a very happy one, very meager in some sense, but full of love and the grace of God. And we're glad to share it with you.
I also remember we went shopping for some ornaments for our tree. I can remember the store. I remember exactly where in the store they were, and we still have one of them today, 42 years later. And P.S., it took me 5 years to surprise him with a gift that he didn't know about ahead of time some way.
It's our first year that we were married and everything. We'd just been married just a few days and everything. We got married on December the 12th. And we didn't have too much money because we did take a little short honeymoon. And the first thing I gave her for Christmas was a toaster, which really wasn't for her, it was for us to go into the house. But she used the toaster quite a bit.
I come with hat in hand and wreath on head to represent the spirit of Christmas past. The first Christmas I was in Europe, I stayed at home in Nuremberg, which is the most beautiful village in the entire world. Every child in Nuremberg had made a lantern and carried in it a candle. And on that night, every light in the city was extinguished, and those children came swinging off the road, carrying their lanterns, thousands of them. It was absolutely unbelievable. There was a nativity scene on the castle wall, and then every church bell in Nuremberg rang, and the whole earth shook, which leads me to think that Scripture really has it wrong. Our blessed Lord was born in Nuremberg. I went, not unlike the wise men, the next Christmas to Bethlehem, and we sat in Shepherd's Field and sang and thought perchance we could hear the angels singing. It had gotten to be almost too exquisitely beautiful, and we went to the Church of the Nativity and were somewhat shaken up when there was an electric sign on the front which flashed on and off and said, "Gloria in excelsis Deo." Then the entire group who were with me, and naturally I was their guardian angel, and one on one side would scream, "David!" And I would rush over there, and they said, "Someone has pinched me." Then I would rush to the other side because somebody on that side had screamed, "Someone has pinched me." The Italians were there. Even to celebrate the birth of Jesus, they pinch people in the posterior section. My third year in Europe, I went to Walgrain, which is a beautiful little village in Austria. This is the city where Father Moore wrote Silent Night. It was so cold that the water in the holy water fount was frozen solid. We had had too much to eat, and as we sat there waiting for midnight mass, many of us dozed off. When the organ let forth its first Gloria, it frightened us to death, and we thought the Russians were coming over the border and were almost leaping out to make our freedom towards Switzerland. When the service was over, we went into the yard. The Germans decorate graves with tiny Christmas trees, with lighted live candles. And we sang Stille Nacht in our best German around Father Moore's grave. The other away from home Christmas was in the Far East, where I was fighting. And it was such a sad time that the United States government had outlawed the carol, which was very popular in the United States, "I'll Be Home for Christmas," because we so very obviously were not going to
Probably
be.
been 15 years ago now. I had a little trouble in my heart, and I'd already been in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I was in there during Christmas, and I knew I was going to be in there 2 to 3 more weeks. And when you lay there at Christmas and nobody there but you, your mind really, really does wander. You go back to every Christmas you can ever remember. And you think of your loved ones a lot. I did at that time, I know. And I probably cried some too. It was really a sad Christmas for me.
I was in Munich, Germany, 2 Christmases, back in the 50s, and that was, of course, I was in the service over there, and I remember we had service every Sunday. You could go to service every Sunday, and I was very few actually went to service out of a great number of men that were there, and that was special for me going to service, church service that Christmas and worship.
One of my most memorable Christmas growing up, I was about 7 or 8 years of age. Nobody in the community had very much money, and of course a big Christmas for myself and my cousins where we had oranges, tangerines, and candy. But this Christmas, my parents, out of their strained budget, they bought me a car that was about 18 inches long, 10 inches high, and it was strong enough I could sit on it. So when I look back now, I know that they had to sacrifice something to get that, but it's one of my fondest Christmas. And as their children growing up, it was a challenge for us to keep them from finding out what their presence was under the tree. I think they were 100% successful in finding out what everything was. I know on one occasion my wife forgot to tell them I didn't have the present under the tree, and Alan asked where it was, and she said, "Do you know?" He said, "Yes." So he went and got it.
Christmas has always been a very special, memorable, magical time to me. But I think 2 Christmases stand out in my memory as being most least likely to forget, one of which was my worst Christmas ever. And that occurred in 1949 when I was 13 years old. Being a typical smart-aleck 13-year-old, I nosed around the end of November and found all of my Christmas presents before my mother had a chance to wrap them. When Christmas came, there were no surprises. I'd already had Christmas 30 days earlier, and that stands out in my memory vividly. One of my best Christmases was in 1960, when my 2 daughters were both just old enough to really become excited about Santa Claus. And I never will forget the joy on their faces and the look on their faces when they discovered their gifts under the tree. That stands out also very vividly.
The best Christmas presents that we had was about 2 years ago, and we were in our living room opening our gifts, and everybody was just, real busy as normal opening gifts, and all of a sudden Robbie gave me this little gift, and I looked at it and I thought, what in the world? It's a small, and when I opened it, it was a baby bottle, and I thought, I don't need a baby bottle, Robin, all the kids are too big for that. And then I looked at her, and she had this little mischievous grin on, and I said, oh, we're going to be grandparents again. I said, you're going to have a baby. And she said, yes. And that was to me, that's the best Christmas present she could have given us on, Christmas.
It was, we all drew names. We bring presents, swap presents. Well, Benny, he was getting about 11 years old. He didn't get, he didn't get any toys that year. He just got clothes. And when he found out he didn't get nothing but clothes, he bawled like a beast. He bawled and bawled.
Okay, when I was growing up, my dad was a farmer, and we didn't have a lot of money, so he couldn't go to the store and buy a big toy for all 3 of us children. So he went out and brought us a tricycle, and we had to share the tricycle. And I have such good memories of riding that tricycle around and around and around and around, and we shared it with each other. So I guess maybe that taught us how to share things, because we really couldn't do anything else.
I guess the biggest things that I remember growing up and going to my grandparents' houses and meeting with all the family. My grandpa Smith, he would always come around and give all the grandkids $1. That was a big thing. And up to a certain point, inflation kicked in, he kicked it up to $5. So then he was giving all the grandkids and great-grandkids $5 apiece. And he did that all the way up until he died.
One thing I remember is one morning I got up before everybody else, sat down, laid my presents around me like this, and I just kept looking back and forth at them.
Christmas, but we just felt like we had so much and other people had such a little bit that we decided we would not exchange gifts. So instead of exchanging gifts, we decided that we would just give to different charities. And for the younger children, like Rachel Beth and Leanne and them, I tried to pick some child that was an invalid or something that needed something and send them money in their name. And we had just as much fun, and we feel like we helped other people more. And we are so blessed, we just don't need anything but our help.